All right, so welcome to another deep dive. And today, we're going to be tackling a subject that might make some folks a little bit uncomfortable, honestly.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at how American parents view spanking, hitting their kids.
Right.
And we're going to be using a research article from a journal called Psychology of Violence. And we're also going to be looking at a Reddit discussion about the article. So buckle up. This one, it gets a little bit intense because apparently some parents think it's more okay to hit their kids and to hit their pets.
Yeah, that's it's definitely a head scratcher. The research paper, that's our main source. It involved 296 U.S. parents, and the researchers explored how those parents defined and perceived spanking compared to the other types of physical punishment that they might use within their families. And we have that statistic right away, 30% versus 17%. 30% of the parents who were in the study, they said it was okay to hit their kids, while only 17% thought that it was okay to hit a pet.
Okay, so that's a pretty significant difference. Yeah. I wonder if maybe the justifications that parents use for spanking played a role in those numbers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The research highlighted two main justifications that parents tend to fall back on. One is this idea that spanking is sometimes necessary to discipline a child, especially when other methods just aren't working. And the other justification that came up a lot was the idea that sometimes you need to spank a child to keep them safe
In very
specific situations.
It's for their own good. But the study also looked at how parents perceive different terms for physical punishment.
Right.
So was that where this whole hierarchy of severity thing came up?
That's right. While they were doing the research, the team noticed that parents had very specific ideas about what the different terms for physical punishment meant. So beating was seen as the most severe form of physical punishment. Spanking fell somewhere in the middle. And then there's words like tapping or swatting that parents thought of as milder.
Yeah, I can see how parents would use those milder words to try to downplay what's happening. But at the end of the day, it's all hitting, right? It's not like a tap. Doesn't hurt. What I found really interesting is that some of the parents in the study actually changed their minds about spanking after being involved with the research.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important takeaways.
From the study.
Almost a third of the parents in the study reconsidered their position on spanking. What the researchers believe had the biggest impact was that comparison between hitting a child and hitting a pet, or hitting another member of the family. Having to directly compare their views that way seemed to be a real turning point for some.
It seems like it forced them to confront some pretty uncomfortable inconsistencies in their thinking. Like they're basically saying it's okay to hit a child for the same reasons that they would hit a pet, but then they balk at the idea of actually hitting a pet. So I guess it just highlights the power of forcing people to stop and think critically about what they believe and why.
Exactly. But let's move on over to our Reddit discussion, because those users definitely did not shy away from thinking critically about this. The discussion thread was incredibly lively.
Yeah. Did you say that again? It seems like everybody's got an opinion about this. One of the comments that stood out to me was one that brought up the idea of training dogs, using positive reinforcement, and how maybe we could apply those same gentler techniques to children too.
That's an interesting point. And another commenter talked about the long-term psychological effects that being hit as a child can have, and emphasized that the trauma can stick around long after the physical pain is gone.
Yeah, that's really heartbreaking, actually. It's easy to forget.
Yeah.
The kids are still developing, and the things that we do and say can have consequences that last a lifetime.
Absolutely. The discussion wasn't all negative, though. There were also some people who were very passionately defending spanking, and they saw it as a tool that's sometimes necessary. But I think what's most valuable about that Reddit discussion is that it gave people a place to share their personal experiences with spanking and how it affected them, which really brought a human element into the research.
Yeah. And it reminds us that these aren't just abstract ideas. These are real families and real childhoods that are being shaped by how parents choose to approach discipline. Other commenter mentioned the dangers of authoritarian parenting styles. I don't know if that's something that you can elaborate on for us a little bit.
Authoritarian parenting is a style characterized by strict rules and a high level of control. There's not a whole lot of room for negotiation, and parents tend to focus on obedience more than they do on understanding their child's perspective. The problem is, when kids are raised in this kind of environment, they can end up with low self-esteem and they can struggle with decision-making later on in life.
Yeah, it's like they don't learn to think for themselves because they've always been told what to do.
That's a good way to put it. I think what this Reddit comment was trying to highlight is that spanking can be a symptom of a larger problem, which is that overly controlling parenting style. And that can be just as harmful as the physical punishment itself.
So we've got this this old school mentality of spare the rod, spoil the child, clashing with this newer, more nuanced understanding of child development. And that's what we see playing out in these
online debates.
Right. You have people who believe that spanking is a necessary form of discipline, and then you have people who believe that any form of physical punishment is harmful, I think. Both sides have valid points. But what's really important here is that we're having this conversation, we're questioning our assumptions, and we're trying to figure out what's best for our kids.
Absolutely. And I think those personal experiences that we saw on Reddit really drove that point home. These aren't just theoretical debates. You know, this is real life stuff that parents are facing every day. And that's what makes this topic so important, because it's ultimately about the well-being of our children and trying to figure out how to raise them in a way that is both loving and effective.
So it sounds like we're moving away from this like one-size-fits-all approach to parenting. And there's this growing awareness that what works for one family might not work for another.
Right.
And that's okay. But how do we navigate all this information? You know, I mean, we've got research findings, we've got personal stories, and we've got all these different opinions that sometimes clash. It can be really overwhelming. Where do we even begin?
I think acknowledging that there is no easy answer is the first step. Parenting is a constant process of learning and adapting. We have to be willing to question our own beliefs and stay informed and be open to trying different things. I think what we can take away from this deep dive is like, there's a lot more to consider here than we might realize initially.
So it's not as simple as spanking is right or spanking is wrong.
Exactly. It goes way beyond those simple labels. We have to
consider the potential consequences of our actions, both in the short term and the long term. And I think the Reddit discussion especially really highlighted the fact that physical punishment can have a lasting impact on a child's emotional and psychological well-being. And the research shows that too.
So what are some of those long-term consequences? We've touched on low self-esteem, difficulty making decisions. What else do parents need to be aware of?
Well, the research shows that children who experience physical punishment are more likely to struggle with anxiety, depression, and aggression. They might also have trouble forming healthy relationships later in life. And there's also a growing body of research that suggests that physical punishment can actually change how the brain develops, leading to changes in the areas that are responsible for emotional regulation and impulse control.
Wow. That's pretty sobering information. Sounds like the stakes are a lot higher than a lot of people might realize.
They are, and that's why it's so important to have this information. You know, we need to be having these honest conversations about the potential harms of physical punishment. And we also need to be exploring alternative discipline strategies that are proven to be more effective and less harmful.
Okay, so let's talk about those alternatives. If the evidence is suggesting that spanking can be harmful, then what are parents supposed to do instead? What are some of those strategies that you mentioned?
One of the most effective and widely recommended approaches is positive parenting. It's based on the idea that discipline should be about teaching and guiding, not punishing. And it focuses on building a strong, positive parent-child relationship, setting clear expectations, and providing consistent support.
So it's more about teaching kids how to behave appropriately than just reacting when they misbehave.
Exactly. Positive parenting involves things like using natural consequences, offering choices, and focusing on solutions rather than blame. It's also about being empathetic and understanding your child's perspective.
That all sounds really great in theory, but I imagine it can be pretty challenging to put into practice.
Especially
when you're in the heat of the moment. I mean, sometimes it feels like kids are pushing your buttons on purpose.
Oh, absolutely. Parenting is hard work, no matter what approach you take. But I think the key with positive parenting is to be consistent. It takes time and effort to build those positive relationships and establish clear expectations. But the payoff It's huge. When children feel loved and supported, they're more likely to cooperate and behave in ways that are consistent with the values that you're trying to instill.
So it's really about playing the long game, huh? It's not about immediate obedience. It's about raising kids who can regulate their own behavior and make good choices, even when you're not around, which I think ties back to what we were talking about earlier with the authoritarian parenting styles. You're constantly controlling your kids and telling them what to do. They never really learn to think for themselves.
That's exactly right. And that's where positive parenting can be so beneficial, because it allows children to develop those crucial decision-making skills and learn to take responsibility for their own actions. It also fosters a sense of independence and self-reliance, which are essential for success later on in life.
So it sounds like positive parenting is a more holistic approach. It's not just about stopping unwanted behaviors. It's about building a foundation for healthy emotional and social development.
Precisely. It's about raising children who are not only well-behaved, but also resilient, confident, and capable of forming healthy relationships. And those are qualities that will serve them well throughout their lives. But it's important to remember that positive parenting isn't some kind of magic bullet. There will still be challenges, and there will still be times when you feel frustrated or overwhelmed. But the key is to keep those long-term goals in mind, and remember that you're not alone in this.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message. There's so much pressure on parents these days to be perfect. But in reality, we're all just doing the best that we can. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to ask for help. What matters most is that we're learning, constantly learning, and striving to be the best parents that we can be.
I completely agree. Parenting is a lifelong journey, and it's one that we're all on together. You know, we need to be supporting each other and sharing our experiences and learning from one another, because at the end of the day, our kids are our greatest teachers. They challenge us, they inspire us, and they remind us what really matters.
It really does feel like that sense of community
is
so important. When it comes to parenting, we need spaces where we can talk openly and honestly about the challenges that we're facing and learn from each other's experiences. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, let's bring it back to you, our listener. Where do you stand on this whole spanking debate now? Have your views shifted at all after hearing about this research and the different perspectives that we saw in the Reddit community?
You know, I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is a very personal and often emotionally charged topic. There is no right or wrong answer. And what works for one family might not work for another. But I think what we can all do is strive to be more informed and more intentional about how we approach discipline.
We talked about those subtle hierarchies in the language that we use to describe physical punishment. You know, words like tapping or swatting almost make it sound less serious than it really is. Thinking about that changed how you view those terms at all? Do they still feel as harmless as they once did?
That's a really important question to reflect on. It highlights the power of language. The words that we use shape our thoughts and beliefs, and they can have a real impact on how we perceive the world around us. It's like those aha moments that we were talking about earlier. Sometimes just by reframing something, looking at it from a different angle, we can gain a whole new understanding.
This deep dive has definitely challenged some of my own assumptions about discipline, and I know that our listeners are probably grappling with some of these same questions. If spanking is off the table, what are we left with? What are some practical alternatives that parents can use to effectively discipline their children while still fostering a positive and nurturing relationship?
Well, as we touched on earlier, positive parenting offers a wide range of techniques that are both effective and supportive. One of the key principles is using natural consequences. It's about letting children experience the natural outcomes of their choices. For example, if a child refuses to wear a coat on a cold day, they might feel cold and uncomfortable. And that natural consequence can be a really powerful teacher. And it doesn't require any yelling or punishment from the parent.
So it's like they're learning from their own experiences rather than just being told what to do. What are some other techniques that parents might find helpful?
Another important aspect of positive parenting is offering choices whenever possible. This gives children a sense of agency and helps them to feel like they have some control over their lives. So instead of saying, get dressed right now, you could say, do you want to wear the blue shirt or the red shirt? It's a small change, but it can make a big difference in how the child responds.
Yeah, it's about respecting their autonomy while still setting those boundaries. But what about those times when a child's behavior is just totally unacceptable. I mean, there are going to be situations where you need to step in and take control. What do you do then?
That's where things like timeouts or the removal of privileges can be effective. The key is to use those techniques in a way that is calm and consistent. It's not about punishing the child. It's about giving them a chance to calm down and regain control of their emotions. And it's also important to remember that these techniques should always be used in conjunction with positive reinforcement.
So it's like this balancing act. You're setting limits
Yeah.
and holding kids accountable for their actions, but you're also providing them with the love and support that they need to grow and learn.
Exactly. And that's the heart of positive parenting. It's about creating an environment where children feel safe, respected, and empowered to make good choices. It's about building a strong and positive parent-child relationship that can weather any storm.
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from this deep dive is that there's always more to learn. You know, we have to be willing to challenge our own assumptions, stay informed about latest research, and be open to trying new things. And most importantly, we need to be kind to ourselves. Parenting's hard work. We're all just doing the best that we can.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There is no such thing as a perfect parent, and it's okay to make mistakes. What matters most is that we are constantly striving to learn and grow, and that we're creating a loving and supportive environment for our children. And remember, there are resources out there to help you. Parenting books, websites, support groups, therapists. Don't be afraid to reach out for help when you need it.
That's a great reminder we're all in this together. So if this deep dive has sparked some questions for you, or maybe you're feeling inspired to explore some of these topics a little bit further, don't keep it to yourself. Talk to other parents, do your own research, and keep those conversations going.
Because ultimately, it's about finding what works best for you and your family. And it's about raising happy, healthy, well-adjusted human beings who can go out into the world and make it a better place.
Beautifully said. And that brings us to the end of another deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration. And remember, the learning never stops. Until next time.